Hello, and welcome to a bonus episode of the Burnt Pancakes podcast. I am your host, Katie Fenske, and this is officially the 1 year anniversary of the Burnt Pancakes podcast. So I thought I'd come on and do a special anniversary bonus episode. So in this episode, it's solo, and I just want to go through and tell you kind of the backstory of how I started this podcast, some of the behind the scenes, learn a little bit about the stats, how this podcast is doing, what I've learned along this journey, and what the goals are for the next coming years of the podcast. So the other day, I was hanging out with my friend, Megan. You've heard her on the podcast. And she asked me, "What brings you joy?" And so I thought about it for a second. And I was like, you know what? This podcast, this is something so fun for me to do when I get off these interviews, conversations. I just feel so filled up. And I don't know, sometimes as a mom, we're so consumed with motherhood that sometimes doing something outside of motherhood, even though this is talking about motherhood, it just really brings me joy. And this is something like I feel very accomplished when I record an episode and I do my editing and I upload it and I get everything done. I feel like that day I've really accomplished something. So this brings me joy. I love doing this. In terms of why I started it, I don't think I've ever really gone through the whole story of where this podcast came from or where the name came from. This was back in 2021. My youngest son was one. Let's see, Maverick was one at the time. And I was still working as a teacher. So I was working it's kind of a different job. I was a teacher, but I worked mostly with homeschool kids, but it was through a charter school. So it gave me a lot of flexibility. But as the years went on, as I worked there, it started to have more regulations and they were starting to require a lot more like time constraints. So instead of just being able to pick my schedule whenever I wanted to meet with my families, there was a lot of like rules about it. And I just had this feeling. I got an email one day and it said, "Hey, next year we're going to start doing 9 o'clock required Zoom meetings every day." And my first thought was, oh my gosh, 9 o'clock is when I take my middle son to preschool. I won't be able to bring him to preschool. And that just broke my heart. I felt like I'm a mom and I've always wanted to do this. I've always wanted to be a mom. And now I'm not able to do that because of this job. And it just started not feeling aligned with what I was passionate about. And it was like a turning point for me. Um, my husband asked me, uh, well, if you're not going to do teaching anymore, then what do you like to do? And the first thing that came out of my mouth was, well, I like talking to moms and I like helping them. I just had this feeling of like giving back. Like the early days of motherhood was so hard for me, but I had some incredible women, incredible groups kind of like take me under their wing and help me out. And I just wanted to give back and do that for other moms. So that was kind of like a seed planted. And I was like, how am I going to do that? And how am I going to quit my job and do that? But fast forward a year and I did end up starting my blog, I got my website, started doing the social media thing, the YouTube channel. And a year later, with being able to do my potty training consulting, I did end up quitting my job. I still hadn't gotten the podcast going yet, but I knew somehow I wanted it to be me chatting about motherhood. Originally, it was like, do I do a solo? Do I have like one person on as my co-host? Do I do a bunch of guests? And I guess it just took a while to just figure out what that was going to look like or kind of do it as I went. But I also wanted like a cute area to do it in. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can see my cute little background. It took me a while to get my spare room. I first had to kick my son out of it because he was a baby and he needed to be moved in with his three brothers. So we moved him into the other room. I set up my like office in this room. It's my office / guest room. But I put up all these pictures along the closet door that were like pink colors and had like motherhood theme, girly theme. And it started feeling like, okay, so this could be a room where I do my podcast in. My husband had gotten me microphones like the year before, like a couple months before for Christmas. And so I was kind of like, okay, like this is going to happen. I'm going to have to start this. I can't just keep saying I want to start a podcast. I'm like, I actually have to figure it out. So it was back in January of 2023 that I joined like a business mastermind group. It was a bunch of women, and we all were kind of in the same place where we're like, we want to be moms, we want to be home more for our kids, don't know how to do that. And on one of our first meetings, the leader said, okay, what are your goals? What do you want to do? And I told everyone, I want to start a podcast for moms. And that was the first time that I had told anyone outside of my husband and my best friend. So it was kind of like making it real. It started to feel more real. But there was just something magical about that group and having all these women like cheering you on and not going, well, that's crazy. Why do you want to do that? But like, yeah, that's great. You'd be great at it. You should. So within 2 months of joining that group, I recorded my trailer. I got everything uploaded and I was like, I'm doing it. I am going to start this podcast. I started asking friends if they would come on and, pre-recording some episodes. And officially on March 17th of 2023, the first episode of the Burnt Pancakes podcast came out. Um, you all know I love the phrase, everyone burns their first pancake. And I just want the message of we are moms learning as we go. I have, quote unquote experts come onto the podcast to give their stuff, but we also just talk about like, hey, moms, we're all making mistakes. Like, here's how to learn as we do this. Um, so I was super excited when it came out. My goal was to have one episode come out every Friday. And I did that except for the 2 weeks over Christmas. It was just, I wanted to enjoy the holidays. I didn't want to have to think about sending out an email and doing a blog post and all that stuff. So some of the stats of the podcast, within this last year, I have put out 51 episodes. Yes, 51 was the last one that came out on Friday. I have had on 39 guests, a couple repeat guests. So you've heard my friend Megan has been on more than once. I've had Rachel Choate on more than once. I have like a couple guests that have been on recently this winter that we've already kind of like, okay, you're coming back on. We're going to get you to speak again. Each episode, I've written a blog post, I've sent out an email, I've done the social media stuff. I have to this point a little over 5,000 downloads. And my best month was the last month, February of 2024, where I had 500 downloads. Now, if you're not in the podcast world, that probably, those numbers still don't make much sense to me. I know if you're a very popular one, you're going to get like in the millions. But I'm a mom who started a podcast with a mission to spread a word. And my goal is to improve my own numbers each month, because that means more moms are hearing this message. So the more I can share this, and it still like blows my mind. Like last month, 500 times this message has been spread to women. The guests that I've had on have been able to share their wisdom with people. So that like is beyond inspiring to me. So, but my goal is to really improve those numbers, to just like keep going, keep starting off where I did in year one and see where year two takes me. I right now have 22 5-star reviews, and the reviews are really like, they're very helpful, not only to grow your podcast, but I just love hearing who's listening, what you guys are liking. One of the ones I read recently that really struck me, I have it right here. It said, this podcast is lighthearted and amusing as well as informative. It feels as though I'm hanging with mom friends during what used to be my mundane evening cleaning hour. So happy to have found this gem of a podcast. And that just kind of sums up what I wanted it to be. I wanted this to be a podcast where you listen because you want to connect with a friend. You want to like the mundane life of a mom. Yeah, you want to bring some laughter to it. I think I'm funny, but I really want to like make you laugh and also make you feel heard and seen. And for me, podcasts were something that made me feel connected to other women very much during those early days of motherhood when sometimes it can get really lonely. So that's really what I wanted this podcast to be. Some of my two top podcasts that have come out last year, to me, this is just hilarious. The two that have the highest amount of downloads The first one is, what do you actually need on your baby registry? So that was one of my earlier ones back last spring, has one of the highest number of listens. Um, and then the other one is the one I recorded recently in January, all about menopause. So we're getting like pre-pregnancy all the way to the topic of menopause covered in this podcast. And those are both doing really, really well. So sometimes I worry that like my topics are too broad. Like maybe I should niche down. Maybe it should just be like new mom talks but then I realized like, no, we're all like needing to hear this stuff. Like, even if you just had babies, you're going to go through menopause at some point, or you're going to turn 40 like me and talk about perimenopause. So I think it's really fun that the topics that we talk about kind of are all over the place, but in a good way. Some of the countries that have tuned into this podcast, of course, the United States, because we're here, Australia, Denmark, France, Japan, Canada, Great Britain, Spain, and Nigeria. It's fascinating to me to see where all these listeners are coming from. Now, some of the things I have learned in the last year just from putting together this podcast. First thing is that you can figure anything out. I did not go to school to learn how to be a podcast host. Fortunately for me, I have a husband that's kind of tech savvy and he can like help me with microphones and taught me a little bit about video editing, but I had to figure this stuff all out. I had to figure out how to record myself, how to edit that, how to add music, where to get the music from, how to upload it to a host that can distribute it to all the directories, all this new stuff I had to learn. But trust me, it's actually not that hard. So if you're interested in starting a podcast, it's really pretty easy. I could show you how to do it. So let me know. But it's also such a fun thing to do. So I am so glad I took the time to figure it out, because before I started, it was kind of like, whoa, how does anyone do this? Now that I'm doing it, I'm like, this is great. Like, why doesn't everyone do it? Another thing I've learned from starting this podcast is that having a life outside of just being a mom really fills me up. So I absolutely love being a mom. It's amazing. I spend most of my time thinking and doing motherhood stuff, but having this side gig has been really great for me. Again, when my friend Megan said, "What fills you up?" It's the podcast. Like, I just feel so accomplished and so good about my day when I've had like a day of recording and I've gotten all my work done. Another thing I've learned from this podcast is just how much I adore chatting with moms. Um, the reason I think I needed to start this is because motherhood has taught me that I am definitely an extrovert. When my oldest was a baby, sitting at home with him felt awful. Um, you have this new baby, and I was not working. I didn't really have friends up where I was living, and I felt so disconnected. And I noticed that it was affecting my mood. So when I was able to start connecting with other moms and, branching out of my house with a baby, my mood was better and I just felt alive. I know some people are introverts and they feel more comfortable not being around a lot of people, but for me, starting the podcast was just another extension of like, I just love to talk to moms. I loved meeting moms at a park and just chit-chatting, getting to know them. So because I love to talk about motherhood and connecting with moms, it just made sense that I'd create my own space for that. I really do feel like a high when I'm recording. My husband works a lot from home, and there have been multiple times where like I'm recording a podcast and he's there and he'll ask me like, "Oh, how'd the podcast go?" And I just tell him like, it's seriously so fun. Like, oh my gosh, Jake, I just got off this podcast with his mom. She was so great. She was so fun. I just feel like I connect really well with a lot of the guests. I think because we're all going through motherhood. And so, I mean, how do you not connect over shared miseries? um, I especially love when I have my best friend on, Megan. She's absolutely the best to talk to. I really, really loved, I had Rachel Choate on twice, and she's another one that I told my husband, I'm like, I think I just made a new best friend. Like, she's so fun. Um, Sarah Parise was on, oh gosh, like 2 weeks ago. And again, I was like, Do we live close enough to meet for coffee? Because I think we could be really, really good friends. So I'm feeling that way about a lot of my guests, where I love connecting. Now, one thing that you also need to know is that these solo podcasts are really hard for me. I just have a lot of doubts about, will this sound boring? Um, am I not funny? Do I not sound like natural enough when I'm not just like conversing with a friend? So the solo podcasts are ones that I feel like I want to get better at them. Because it's nice to just be able to like pull out the microphone and record without having to schedule someone and book anyone. But it does put me with a little bit of self-doubt. So bear with me if it sounds awkward, but I'm going to continue to keep doing these solo podcasts throughout my conversations because I need to push myself, try something new. Now, in terms of goals for the podcast, where I see this thing going, um, like I have really big goals. Like, when you visualize where is life going to be in 5, 10 years, it's amazing. I have dreams of creating like a burnt pancakes community, whether that's retreats or virtual gatherings for new moms or middle moms whose kids are in school, or moms with teens, or moms who are going off to college, just somehow a way for moms like me who are extroverts to connect. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to look yet, but that is one of my goals. I think even a book club would be really fun. I'm a big fan of specifically historical fictions that center around a mom character. If you'd like some suggestions, I have plenty, but I just thought it'd be so fun one day to like have a burnt pancakes book club, something like that. Another thing I'm interested in is possibly doing workshops or courses. Um, Lately, I've been really researching kids and technology, kids and social media, and just figuring out like I'm such at the early stage of this. So my oldest is 9 and he keeps asking for a phone. And so I've been like picking people's brains like, how does this look? What do we do? Like, I don't want to give him one yet. Like, how are we going to navigate the next, 5 years where this is just inundated with him for him? So somehow to put together like a kids and technology workshop, I think would be really cool, and possibly doing some courses on other parenting topics. And I just want to continue to grow the podcast, my voice, spread the voice of women who are coming on the podcast, and just see where it takes us. Because I think there's big things coming. This first year was a sign that, like, yes, I can do it. And now let's see how we can grow it. So that wraps up our first year of the podcast. I have so many great guests lined up with all sorts of topics. I'm going to continue to like keep you guessing each week, whether we're talking about new mom tips or whether we're talking about our menopause strategies, but we're going to be talking about it all. I would love to hear from you more though, what you'd be interested in hearing. Do you want more solo podcasts? Do you want more like early childhood? Let me know because I can find guests that can give us everything. I can tell you about my experience. I would love some feedback. And now, how you can help the podcast. So, the best way to grow a podcast is to have people rate it, leave a review on Apple, follow it on Spotify, subscribe to my YouTube channel. All of those things help like push your podcast out. So if your podcast has a lot of reviews on Apple or 5 stars on Apple, if someone's searching motherhood or parenting, it will put yours up higher in the list. And ultimately, even though I'm doing this for fun, I'm doing this to share my voice, ultimately, we want more people to hear the podcast. So that would be a way that you can help me. So a side note also, if you feel like you want to come on and talk to me, I would love to have you reach out to me about being a guest as well. I know I've been having a lot of, you know, I say quote unquote experts because I don't want you to ever feel like I am putting someone on who's telling you like exactly how to do it. More like, let me share how I learned how to do it. But if you have a topic that you're like, I would love to talk about this, please reach out to me because you know me, I love talking to moms and that's my jam. So cheers to the first year of the podcast. Here is to many more incredible episodes, many more years in the making. And cheers to all of you burning your first pancake with me, and just keep flipping.